G'day guys, welcome back to True Footy. It is Sunday morning and it's time to have a little look at what's remaining in terms of the trades that might go ahead in this upcoming, the last 3 days of the trade period. I believe it ends on Wednesday. My current plan at the moment is to be able to live stream the deadline trades as they go through. So just a heads up to keep an eye out for that. We'll be able to hopefully get Bush and myself cranking on the live stream and we can go through some of the deals as they happen live. But for now, I just thought we'd offer a little bit of a prediction, a little bit of discussion around what are the deals left to be done, because there's still, in particular, a couple of big ones that we would have thought hopefully would have gone down by now, but have dragged on a little longer than people expected. So we'll go through those and I'll offer up a little bit of a prediction or an expectation of how those deals are going to get done. Before we get into it, guys, I'd really appreciate you guys subscribing to the channel. The growth has been fantastic. I do look at my analytics pretty often and it does say that still less than half of you who watch the videos do actually subscribe to the channel. So as always, I would appreciate if you did consider subscribing for more trade content, some draft content, and then all the other content that comes with the football season. But anyway, let's get into some of these deals. I think the first one we can talk about is Jordan Dawson, who still hasn't made his way officially from the Sydney Swans to the Adelaide Crows. Essentially, what we've heard about this deal is it's probably going to cost a pick in the teens. I think Sydney have knocked back an offer previously for pick 17, which the Crows tried to get from the Bulldogs. So that sort of gives you a feel for what Sydney are expecting here, probably in that top 15. They currently hold pick 12 themselves, but want to add to that, of course, with Jordan Dawson playing 64 games for them and being one of their better young players as well. Only 23 years of age. He was offered a 5-year deal from the Swans, and that shows the value that Sydney hold for him. Now, Adelaide have traded away their pick 23 this year in order to acquire a first-round pick next year. I think that was probably acquired to maybe try and have a crack at the pick 1 in this year's draft, which I made a video about previously. But as it stands, they hold 2 first-rounders next year as well, and there's 2 sort of possible schools of thought on the way that Adelaide try and navigate this deal. One of them is that potentially they upgrade Sydney's pick 12 to pick 4 and take Jordan Dawson off their hands. I don't particularly think this is too realistic given Adelaide really want to keep their pick 4 this year. They're actually trying to improve that pick from all reports as well, and it's valued top 5 pick. So I honestly don't think that will be involved in this trade. And don't forget as well, of course, with the lack of contract, Jordan Dawson could potentially walk into the preseason draft. So while I hope that doesn't happen, and I don't think it will happen, it means that Adelaide aren't really under too much pressure to offer up that pick 4. The preseason draft would be an unfortunate result here. I don't think it will happen. I guess you could sort of make the argument that the other teams in front of Adelaide in that preseason draft, including North Melbourne, Collingwood, etc. But I am probably reluctant to think that either of those clubs would select Jordan Dawson when he's crying out to go to South Australia. I don't think they would do that to him. So there is a real possible threat that he does walk to Adelaide in the preseason draft, but I still suspect that a deal probably gets done in terms of a trade. So if we accept that the Crows won't move pick 4 in this year's draft, the only other possible solution, I guess they could offer next year's first, but again, that's probably still going to be around that pick 5 mark, assuming Adelaide don't shoot too high up the ladder. And even if you believe that's a strong possibility, it's still a risk on Adelaide's behalf because they could well and truly end up in the bottom 4 again next year. So that means likely that the Demons pick in next year's draft, which again could be around pick 20, which is less than the 17 that was originally rejected. That's probably going to be a critical part of this trade, but it may not be the only thing that gets traded. On the current picks that Adelaide have, the best available deal I could see is that future first, which is going to say be pick 19 or pick 20, gets sent along with 33 this year to Sydney for Jordan Dawson, but I just don't think that's a good enough or an attractive enough deal for the Swans considering they knocked back 17 previously. The other way they could do it is offer that future first, which is going to be say pick 20 and 33 to the Lions for pick 18 in this year's draft. Again, it doesn't seem like a really attractive deal for the Lions. They do have a potential number 1 draft pick as a father-son next year, and I think it's Josh Ashcroft or something Ashcroft, meaning they're going to probably want to conserve picks in next year's draft as well, but still they've got 2 top 18 picks at the moment. I don't know if that's an attractive enough deal for them to trade out of the first round here. So those are my nominations for how it could get done. My prediction is that it will get done in the form of a trade. I don't think Sydney will let him go for nothing in the preseason draft. It will be a combination of Melbourne's first round pick next year and potentially a second rounder on top of that, but again, that's still probably unders for a player like Jordan Dawson. We could see some other creative upgrades that go in the way of Sydney, but I do think it will get done. The other stalemate that we kind of suspected would go this long is for the contracted Jordan Clark moving from Geelong to Fremantle. The current stalemate is that Fremantle hold both picks 19 and 22, and it seems like Geelong want 19 and Fremantle are not budging and will only offer 22. Unlike the Jordan Dawson deal, as I've talked about in previous videos, Jordan Clark is contracted, so Geelong are well and truly within their rights to just hold on to him, and they actually have to keep him on their books for next year if a deal doesn't get done. Personally, as a neutral in this situation, I kind of hope neither side relents. I think I support Geelong in their position of 19 is what we pretty much originally asked for. That's what it takes to get Jordan Clark free from his contract. But equally, from a Fremantle perspective, I think I can see why you'd hold firm and wait 12 months for a guy that's going to be coming out of contract in 12 months. Yes, he may change his mind and want to extend with Geelong, but I don't know if this is a valuable enough deal for Fremantle where they'd consider paying what they consider overs for a player that they don't necessarily need. At the end of the day, he's kind of nominated them. Well, actually, when I say nominated, I don't think he's actually come out and requested a trade yet. It's just kind of this accepted thing that Jordan Clark has negotiated with Fremantle. It's a 4-year deal, so Fremantle clearly rate Jordan Clark to some extent. They must see him as a best 22 player. 4 years reflects that, but they don't generally bend over too often at the trade table. So I think Fremantle will hold their position of 22, and I do expect Geelong will hold their position of 19, and I actually think there's a good chance this deal doesn't happen. If it were to happen, I think it's more likely to be Jordan Clark for 22. Another player that has been thrown into the trade rumour sphere is Ian Hill, or Bobby Hill, as he's more commonly known from GWS. He's originally from Western Australia. He's related to the Hill brothers, but on compassionate grounds has sought a trade to Victoria. Now, this one is a little bit of an eyebrow raiser when you consider the fact that, Hill's family must be in WA, but he's sort of highlighted Brad Hill as a close relative that he needs around for support. I think he's got a pregnant partner. So I don't mean to cast judgment on that, but it does just seem a little iffy that he wants a trade specifically to Melbourne on compassionate grounds. And the fact that it seems to have come quite late in the trade period, I can understand why GWS are skeptical about the urgency of Hill needing to get to Melbourne. Again, another player who's contracted, and I think he'll probably cost a top 25 pick to pry him loose. Sounds like Hill will probably end up at one of Essendon, North Melbourne and Hawthorn, and they've highlighted Essendon as probably the front runner in this race. Now, if you think outside the box a little broader, there could be an interesting one where Geelong enter the race for Bobby Hill, and that could free up the Clark deal where GWS get the pick 22 Fremantle wanted to offer. Geelong flip Jordan Clark to Fremantle and they end up with Bobby Hill. I could see that being relatively even in terms of value. But again, Geelong's not quite in the city of Melbourne, is it? So it's probably more likely he does end up at a club like Essendon. Now, out of the clubs, Essendon, North and Hawthorn, I don't think any of them are going to be willing to trade a top 25 pick. I think Essendon have like 11 and 51 or something like that, and I don't think they will want to split 11. So I think we could be looking at a future second round pick if this deal gets done at all. To make it a little bit more attractive for the Giants, if they really did want to be compassionate and get Bobby Hill to Melbourne, they do have an academy player this year in Josh Fahey, might not be saying that correctly. So in addition to a second rounder next year from, let's say, Essendon, they may ask for an extra third rounder or two, or just something to pad out the points so they could potentially match a bid on Fahey. The Rory Lobb talked to GWS continues to sort of bubble away, and I do think it's one that will probably get done. There was a bit of a war of words, as has been described, between his manager Colin Young and Peter Bell at Fremantle. I think Young basically criticised Peter Bell for being quite transparent. I think this was something that most parties wanted to sort of keep under wraps, but Bell came out and sort of spilled the beans. I think that's basically what I'm gathering from what he said. It seems pretty clear that Lobb wants to move on, and as I've said in previous videos, don't think Fremantle will necessarily be kicking and screaming to get him to stay. I don't actually think this will be that expensive, to be honest, though. I've heard so many mixed rumours, as I've suggested, about this Rory Lobb deal, whether it's going to be expensive or cheap. I'm going to say somewhere in the middle, to be honest, and I could see that Fremantle would be looking to upgrade 19 to GWS's 13 and potentially ask for a future second rounder. So that's Lobb and 19 for 13 and a future second. Fremantle hold themselves in a pretty good position here, where again, I don't think they necessarily have Lobb as an untouchable player. I think he is tradable, but at the end of the day, he's contracted. And GWS, I think with their list profile, should be looking at contending deep in finals this year. So there's a bit of urgency to get a Rory Lobb type into their list. That and the fact that from what I've read, Rory Lobb is very keen to get to the Giants. So I think they'll be considerate of that. And I think they'll be willing to pay a reasonable price for Lobb, but obviously nothing extortionate. As I touched on in the previous video, there's a situation happening at Hawthorn which could throw this trade period into a bit of chaos, but a good kind of chaos. It's going to be exciting potentially. I don't think Jeff Kennett would pen that letter to his members saying you're going to see some surprising trade period decisions without a real intention to make those deals happen. We've talked about O'Meara to Port Adelaide, which could end up being for pick 16. At the time I said, is that attractive enough for Hawthorn? Probably not. Is it attractive enough to O'Meara? I think he wants to stay in Melbourne, but again, players can get talked out of things, and if Amira is at the age of 27, I think he will be, if he doesn't feel valued at Hawthorn and Port Adelaide genuinely think they have a crack at a premiership, maybe he wants to be a part of success because he hasn't particularly had a very successful career so far. So if he wants to chase some success and go to Port Adelaide, I think that could get done for about pick 16. Is that my prediction? I'm pretty 50-50 on it, to be honest. It is hard to see a lot of these deals for Hawks players getting done, but if we just sort of entertain the possibility a little bit, because it is fun as we near the end of the trade period, I feel like guys like Gunston and Bruce could be players that Hawthorn look to move on. We know that Hawthorn are very, very keen on trading above Adelaide in this year's draft. I think it's to get Finn Callaghan, or at least that's the way it's reported. So if they're serious about that, maybe they could unlock Gold Coast pick 3 and send them a couple of experienced players in Gunston and Bruce. Now that probably sounds like absolute madness. Is it mutually beneficial? Is it enough for Hawthorn? I think it probably is. I think if they're serious about trading up the order, and I don't think they really value the veterans in Gunston and Bruce in terms of their short-term value to the club, is it attractive enough for Gold Coast to simply move down 2 spots but get 2 best 22 players in? I can see the temptation for that. I think there's a little bit of pressure on Gold Coast to try and short circuit their rebuild a little bit. Where it doesn't work for them is if it stifles the development of the young kids they've got in. I think we can assume that guys like Ben King won't be pushed out of the side for sure. Jack Lukosius won't be pushed out of the side, and I think he's been talked about as moving forward this year. Could Gunston slot in as an experienced goal kicker alongside those guys? It may push out a Corbett out of the best 22, but again, Gold Coast need to probably start looking at the short term as well. Bruce in particular as well, in addition to that, adds a lot of scoring power for a side that generally struggles to kick a lot of goals. The argument against Bruce is, does it push out a Rankin out of the side? Because I think that could be pretty bad scenario. You've got Rankin and Sexton already as small to medium forwards in that team. Could Bruce work alongside them? Potentially. So I guess what I'm saying is this could work for Gold Coast. I do like it, provided they're not stifling some of their other young guns, and I feel like it could work. I think the other requirement for the Gold Coast Suns as well would be they would need the Hawks to pay a fair bit of those players' salary. I think Gold Coast are probably tighter a little bit with their cap compared to someone like a Hawthorn. Hawthorn are obviously looking to offload players. I think you can assume they can afford to pay a fair chunk of that salary, and if it helps them get the kids they want in the draft, I think they'd be pretty open to that. So just to clarify, this Bruce and Gunston to Gold Coast thing is purely something I've whipped up, but we've seen crazy things happen in the last week of trade period as well, and I do kind of like the idea of this. I would love to see Gunston and Bruce as a double act go to the Gold Coast Suns and help them win a couple extra games a year. Just to clarify this point a little bit further, I think Hawthorn would need something back a bit more than simply an upgrade from 5 to 3, but it may only take the form of like a future third or something like that when you consider the fact that these guys are 30 and 31 respectively going into next season. So if Hawthorn do offload those 3 players, they'll take 3, 16, 21 and 24 to the draft. Is that enough value in the draft to risk, trading out those established players? I'll leave that up to you. Probably not, but they're an aggressive, fierce organization, and if they want to move up the draft, I can see them shaking things up and trying to get it done. We'll rattle off a few of the smaller deals. Pat Lipinski, I expect to get done. I can't imagine it would take too much to get that done. I'm sure the Dogs really want a second rounder for him. I think that was what I've read. With the realistic threat of preseason draft, I don't think Lipinski really commands too much more of that. We've seen talented players who are out of contract walk for around about a third or fourth rounder. One thing that could be beneficial is that Collingwood offer 46 and 48 for Lipinski and 52. I think Collingwood hold currently like 7 picks in the top 50 or very close to that as well. So I know that they need to get points, but if they're serious about trading in a player who's going to fill a spot on their list, then maybe they sacrifice a little bit, and I think they'd still have enough for Dacos in that scenario. And the benefit for the Dogs here is that they get a third rounder and an upgrade on their existing third rounder as well, so they get more points to match a bid for Sam Darcy, because I think they're a little bit light in that respect. Before we wrap up, I will talk a little bit about the Sam Powell-Pepper situation. I made a video talking about Powell-Pepper to the Eagles. It sounds like it wasn't going to happen, and then I did see another article that conflicted that. I will still bet that this doesn't happen because I just think it's a little bit too difficult, but it's still within the range of possibility that we could see a crazy deal happen right at the end of the trade period. I don't think the Eagles have enough to get the trade done in terms of trade collateral for what it would cost for a Powell-Pepper, and I don't think Port have an incentive enough to move him on right now. However, if they do recruit someone like O'Meara for a first rounder, maybe this deal gets a little bit more realistic. If they trade in O'Meara, does Powell-Pepper sort of accelerate his desire to get to a club who can give him midfield time? Again, I've been questioning the fact that the Eagles can give him midfield time right now. I think we're pretty similar to Port in terms of him just being on the outer of that, but I think this is more likely to get done in 12 months' time. But in the off chance that O'Meara does surprisingly get to Port Adelaide, I think Sam Powell-Pepper's move could be accelerated a little bit. Some smaller deals that we expect to get done, I think, pretty early in the new week will be Max Lynch switch to Hawthorn. I think that's still got some legs. Tristan Cherry will find his way to the Saints. Mason Cox still without a home. If he doesn't get traded for a token pick, it'll be as a delisted free agent. I still think he'll probably get to the Brisbane Lions, who haven't made a decision, it seems, between he and Casbolt, and Segler will almost certainly get to the Cats, you'd think. One player that I find a little bit interesting here is Trent Dumont, who is still out of contract at North Melbourne, not necessarily overly old. I think he'll be 27 at this point. So I guess you could argue that he's probably a little bit older than what North need. I think he's still value to the list if they want to keep him. But again, if Port Adelaide want to make a sort of last-ditch attempt for a bit of an outside runner to get some depth into a team that is contending, particularly if they don't get O'Meara, I could see them going a cheap route and getting Trent Dumont and adding him to their list. But anyway, guys, that'll probably wrap up this video, sort of taking a look at the final deals that will take place in this trade period. Like I said, keep an eye out for a live stream. I do intend to do one on the final day of the trade period, which is on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I booked the right day off work. Hope you're still enjoying all the trade content, guys. As I said, really appreciate the support. It's been really good feedback from you guys. Really enjoy doing these videos, so hope you're still enjoying them. As always, guys, like the video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.